Right on, Lucas. Thanks again for doing this. This is about you, your journey in music, and we'll talk about your new EP, The Shimmer.
Yeah, sure.
Cool,
Sure, I'll
man.
talk about myself.
I hope you know a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, it's, some things. I mean, it's been a long journey, so some stuff is kind of blurry, but overall, I remember. I feel like I have a hard drive, and it's kind of getting maxed out.
Sure.
So, yes.
Cool, man. So where are you born and raised?
So I'm from Pennsylvania originally, central Pennsylvania, Williamsport area. It's kind of up in the boonies a little bit,
Okay.
kind of wilderness area. Yeah, from there originally. Kind of moved around a whole bunch in my adult life. Went to University of Pittsburgh for a second, and
Okay.
then went up to Boston. Went to Berklee College of Music up
Oh,
there.
wow.
Yeah, I was there for
Cool.
4 years and graduated from there, and then lived in Philly for 3 years, and then toured out of there. Just kind of did the DIY touring thing for long time, and then moved to New York. Was in New York for a little over a year, and then I moved to Nashville 9 years ago.
Wow.
So yeah, so I've been kind of all over the place. So
Right on. Currently
yeah,
in Nashville then.
yes.
Yeah, I just moved here like
Oh, awesome,
literally like
nice.
a month ago.
That's awesome. Well,
That's why you
welcome.
can see all this stuff in my
Right.
room here.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was the weird. That was one of the weirdest things about moving from northeastern cities, where I was used to living in just kind of one room and shoving everything in one room in these like
Sure.
bigger cities, and then moving here, and then it's like I had a house,
Space.
and I was like, I don't have any stuff. And so it
Right.
took a second to gather stuff, and then I bought a house like 7 years ago, and then it was like I definitely don't have any room, or excuse me, it's like I do have room, but it's like I don't know, I have no stuff for the
Stuff
room
to fill the rooms. Got you.
exactly. So I finally have filled up stuff a little bit more.
Yeah, it looks great, man. You got the nice
thanks.
lighting, and
This is
you
my
got
this is my little studio space down here.
yeah,
So
dude.
yeah,
I
man.
like it. I like
Yeah.
it. Right on. So, wow, you've been quite a few places. I want to talk to you about the Berklee thing. So, how did
Yeah.
you get into music originally?
So I was always like a creative kid in different ways, like art, and drawing and building and things like that. And then, but I wasn't into music really at all until I bought Sergeant Pepper by the Beatles, and
There you
then it
go.
just kind of like flipped a switch in my brain. And
What age was
I've
that at?
13. I was like
Okay.
13, yeah, and I went to Ames department store to buy Montel Jordan's "This Is How We Do It," and
Okay.
they were sold out, unfortunately, and so I bought Sergeant Pepper instead.
Interesting.
Yeah, and
Flip there.
yeah, and it just kind of, yeah, it flipped the switch in my brain, and I just got really. I started playing guitar very soon after. One of my cousins gave me a guitar of his. Also, the Beatles Anthology came out right around that time.
Okay.
So, which if those of you who are Beatles fans who have not ever seen the anthology, it's like the most concise, amazing documentary about the Beatles, because the Beatles made it. So
Right.
the remaining Beatles made it. And so it's like the three, it's like George, Paul, and Ringo like hanging out, talking about all this stuff, and it's like 6+ hours long. So it's like
Sure.
three broken up, and yeah, so that came out, and that like aired on TV around that same time. So it's kind of this perfect storm of finding out that the Beatles were the greatest thing ever. So
I totally agree
so
with you on that one.
yeah, so for a 13-year-old creative kid, it was like, oh my God.
Rad.
Yeah. So then I just kind of became a sponge, and my parents were really supportive, and kind of they were like, well, not that they were trying to see if it was just a flippant thing for me, but they were trying to show me different things musically, and kind of being like, well, maybe he won't be into this, or we'll take him to this like symphony concert, or we'll take him to this musical theater thing, or this choir thing, and everything. I was like, this is awesome. So yeah, I became like a dorky theater kid, and choir, and did all that stuff, and it was that was a huge part of my young life.
That's awesome that your parents were so supportive of that.
Yeah. They're great people, and they had yeah, they're really kind and supportive, and also I feel like it was also helpful that I was the youngest of four, you know what I mean? So I was like, my
Okay.
siblings were quite older than me. I was kind of like the last one. So they're always supportive of all of us, but
Sure.
Yeah, I think that they were kind of at a point in their life where, they, like my other siblings, they like music and they were into music somewhat, but I was like the weird artsy black sheep,
Right.
like the
Sure.
beloved black sheep. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like they, yeah, I think it gave them kind of an excuse to do things that they always kind of wanted to do too. You know what I mean? And
Right.
like,
Right.
and go to shows and dive deeper into music. Plus, it's like I loved so much of the music that they loved. So that was a big thing. I mean, them listening to their records and stuff that they had, and they had Beatles records and like
Sure.
Paul Simon, James Taylor, and all these people that became like such huge early influences and still are like my biggest influences.
Right. Well, I mean, with the new record, you have a song called Lennon McCartney on it.
Yeah. Yes, that is very true. Yes. Yeah, I do.
That's awesome. So guitar was the first instrument. Were you trying to learn those Beatles songs?
Yeah, I mean, like, well, and the funny thing is, this is like, I mean, I'm dating myself, but this was like mid '90s ish. So the internet existed, but it was not anything really.
Okay.
I mean, it was very difficult to find. Basically, it's like if you wanted to learn Beatles songs, you had to buy tablature books.
Yep.
You had to.
We're probably close to the same age.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, and so you had to buy tab books and any newer stuff. Holy crap! You had to like hope that they were big enough. The artists were big enough that they actually could have
the book in like a guitar center.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
I
so
remember that.
yeah, well, and in my area there wasn't even like, I mean, there was music shops and stuff, but like there wasn't guitar centers. There wasn't really. I mean, basically, it's like if you couldn't buy it at we had a Circuit City. And,
sure.
Walmart and stuff like
Circuit
that.
City back in the day, man. They had the rack of like the 90 or 9.99 CDs sometimes.
Oh yes. Yeah. So I mean, it was kind of it was difficult sometimes to find the music if you weren't trying to hear it by ear. And early on, I mean, it's like my ear wasn't that good that I was like, oh, I can just listen to these Beatles songs and figure out everything.
Sure.
When I've been playing for a couple months, but yeah,
Beatles isn't like that. It's not it's not like a Green Day song where you're like, okay, there's about 4 chords here. I can figure this out.
Right.
There's so much there's so many things happening during a Beatles song that it's like, how do I pick out the guitar here?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Well, and that was like, it was like the big guitar influences it was the Beatles. And then it was, because that was kind of, hippie jam band boom of the mid '90s. So it was like, I was super into Dave Matthews Band. I still love the Dave Matthews Band. And the band Rusted Root. They had the band, they had the song Send Me On My Way, which is like, you still hear it all the time. And I'll hear it on like TikTok videos and stuff. And I'm like, oh, Rusted Root, there you are. But their playing styles, both Michael Glebicki from Rusted Root and Dave Matthews, have such unique playing styles, and they both played acoustic guitars, but they played them kind of like they were playing them like lead instruments, So it was like Dave Matthews playing Satellite and doing like you learn all these arpeggiations and all this stuff, and so it was those were the big influences in how I learned how to play guitar. Also, like folkier stuff, James Taylor, Gordon Lightfoot, Paul Simon. But again, all that stuff is relatively complex compared to what you're saying, like friends that were listening to Green Day and Nirvana and were playing power chords, which is cool, but it's like that wasn't what I was into, So it was like trying to figure out that stuff was it was challenging, and it was mostly through finding those books, or again occasionally finding a good tablature page where it was like, oh my gosh, I found one. This was actually kind of accurate.
Right. Oh yeah, right. Ultimate Guitar Tab or whatever online. And then they'd have like 9 versions. And you're like, well, which one's the right one?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And most of that, even still to this day, sometimes like I'll look up a song and I'm like, this is definitely not right.
Right. Or they'll be like, it's in this tuning. You're like, no, it's not.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Kids these days can actually just, or even adults, I guess, like you can just go on YouTube and hope the person knows what the hell they're doing.
Well, I mean, and that's one of the fun things over the quarantine was there were so many people like Dave Matthews, like Michael Glebicki of Rusted Root, and it's like different people were doing. Obviously, they were doing at home,
like
just acoustic shows,
sure.
Right? And I mean, obviously, like a group like the Dave Matthews Band, they have so many videos out. Like, I mean, you can find so much of stuff where you can see his hands pretty accurately, doing what they're doing. But the quarantine was really cool because even people like I love Rufus Wainwright. And Rufus Wainwright was doing these shows he was doing a song every single day. And every single day, it's just like his husband, like holding the phone, like, real DIY. But you could actually see what the chords were and what he was playing. And so it's actually this year, I feel like I learned a bunch of songs because I was just like, I want to learn that song. And this is actually them like playing very up close playing. And I'm like, oh, that's what they're doing.
Right. That's so funny because I mean, I was more I love the Beatles growing up. My parents are huge into it. Sgt. Pepper's was the first Beatles record. My dad had the cassette and we'd listen to it in the car. My younger sister's name is Abby because of Abbey Road.
Oh, that's
the same
awesome.
way. But anyway, like I remember, but I was more into the punk rock bands. So I remember going to shows and like trying to watch, okay, it was E.G. Try to like remember the songs that I liked so I can go home and like attempt to play it, or you know what I mean? Like, okay, what was the chords? Okay, but it was easier to follow, obviously, because it was like 4 power chords and whatever. Right. But like something like Dave Matthews Band, I mean, you have to really probably watch back a few times.
Oh yeah. Well, and then
figure that out.
It was so exciting when I remember when they did MTV's Live at the 10 spot once, and it was it was right before their album Before These Crowded Streets came out. And so this is like height of like Dave Matthews Band had just started really playing arenas. Like they were selling out arenas everywhere. It's like 97, 98. And they did Live at the 10 spot. And it was so exciting because it was before the album came out and they actually played all these songs from the album. And my friends and I figured out how to play a bunch of the songs, like the song Rapunzel. We learned how to play the song Rapunzel and Stay. We learned how to play these before the album came out.
And like, it's funny.
That was a big deal. You know what I mean? And so like I remember I think it was like 9th grade I think it was the first time that I ever actually played guitar in front of anybody. It was like not a battle. It was like a talent show in middle school. And I played Rapunzel. And I don't even think the album had come out yet. And I was like, I felt so cool.
Yeah. Wow, did you write that?
Yeah. Yeah. So that was always really exciting. Because again, it was like you couldn't find, unless they released a VHS or something, and then eventually DVDs, like you couldn't really find videos of people unless it was official. It was officially released. Yeah.
Sure.
So yeah, kids these days, man. You don't know the struggle.
Exactly. So with that guitar for a while, I mean, you know how to play a plethora of instruments, and the way you perform is crazy with like looping, and it's just you, right? I mean, you don't have like a band.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. It's Go ahead.
How did you learn other instruments? I mean, like, was it just guitar from there? You're like, okay, I really want to learn this or that, or like, how did you kind of progress?
Well, I mean, those bands, I feel like setting the singer songwriters that I love aside, like the Paul Simons and James Taylors and Gordon Lightfoot's, Jim Croce's, set those folks aside. The bands that I started listening to, I think it was, I'm so glad that I started listening to bands that they all played wacky instruments. You know what I mean? It's like the first thing you get into is the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper. You know what I mean? So it's like they're using all this crazy stuff, and Rusted Root plays all these different instruments and wacky stuff. And it wasn't the cool thing about Rusted Root, and I don't mean this offensively, was they weren't like crazy virtuosos at those instruments, right?
Sure.
Like they'd play penny whistles or flutes or whatever, and mandolins. And it was stuff that I could actually grasp, where I was like, oh, I can mess with that. Like I could figure that little penny whistle part out, or, or that mandolin line. I could figure that out. Dave Matthews Band, obviously they have a bunch of different instruments in their band. That's much more kind of,
and they're all like ridiculously good.
Exactly. Yeah. That's like obviously a whole other level, but it's like the concept where it's like, you can have a band with all these different instruments and all this different stuff. And I was just always so into and obsessed with instruments and like where they came from. And I mean, I love collecting toys too. So, I mean, like that helped. It was like, ooh, toys.
Right.
I was never afraid of just kind of screwing around with stuff. And so I always like go at, when people are like, you're a multiple instrumentalist, like you play everything. I'm like, well, I play guitar pretty well, and I sing well, but but I know people who like legitimately play the penny whistle. So I'm always like, yes, I play those things, but it's like I always feel like I play them enough to do, to play these melodies, to play these little harmony parts, you know what I mean? Because it's just kind of I mean, not to compare myself to Paul McCartney, but Paul McCartney kind of says the same way, like, or says the same thing about himself, because he's played so many instruments on his records and the Beatles records. And people are like, you play everything. And he's like, well, like, I play guitar, I play bass, like, I kind of fake the piano. He's like, but like everything else, I just kind of screw around with.
Right. But there's always that. Go ahead.
No, that's just kind of the way that, it's like, I feel like there's not a fear. I don't have a fear of picking up something and being like, oh, I'll just like mess with this until it sounds like something.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, that definitely stems from those bands, and growing up listening and that's just like what I was listening to. It just had all these instruments in it, and these people were actually playing them. And so I was like, oh, maybe I could do that.
Yeah. Well, there's always that famous that John Lennon was asked, oh my gosh, like, is Ringo Starr the best drummer in the world? And he's like, he's not even the best drummer in the Beatles.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it's funny when you like, I mean, obviously the Beatles, there's so much information on them, and I mean, I could talk about them forever, but it's like when you dive into what they actually played on it, like I have a book that shows fairly accurately what instruments everybody played on all the sessions.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's really cool because like the song Don't Pass Me By, there's a violin part in it. It's like the one's like, don't pass me by, don't make me cry, don't make me blue. And there's this violin part, and that's George Harrison playing it.
Yeah. And I didn't know that that's him, but I know that he was like kind of him and McCartney were like the mastermind, so to speak. And like Lennon got a lot of the credit, but I mean, he was obviously a brilliant songwriter as well. But
yeah, and like all the flutes and like the flutes and like recorder parts on like Fool on the Hill, that's all Paul McCartney.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and there's the song that little tune, Why Don't We Do It in the Road, that's all Paul McCartney. There's no other Beatles on it. It's only Paul McCartney, and he just like came into the studio early and just played through everything, and they just kept that
take. Wow, that's nuts. That's super interesting. I'm gonna look this book up because I have a ton of Beatles stuff. Actually interviewed somebody the other day who had behind, I mean, he had a bunch of gold records and other things behind him, but he had the Butcher album behind him. And that was the first thing I spotted. I'm like, I was like, is that just like a print? And he's like, no, dude, I found this thing at a flea market, and he had this whole story about it. He's like, it's and I'm just like, I blew my mind that's
so cool
that I actually saw it. I've seen it in person a few times at like Amoeba Records, and just like one time I asked the guy if I could just like hold it. It was like $500, and he's like, yeah, sure, why not? And I'm like, he put it back up on the shelf, and I'm like, well, someday.
Right? Yeah. That's so.
But anyway, okay. So you said you went to where did you went to Penn State?
Yeah, I went the University of Pittsburgh.
Oh, University of Pittsburgh. Yeah. Okay.
Where I'm from, I'm from very close to Penn State University, but no, I went to Pitt. So
okay, you went to Pittsburgh. Were you going there for music?
Yeah, I well, funny thing, because I didn't really I didn't know you could go to college for songwriting. I didn't know that was really a thing, and like I was so into choir and musical theater and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of figured, well, I want to go to college because I loved learning, and I wanted to keep learning, like, officially music and kind of formally learn music. But I always knew that I wanted to be a singer-songwriter and do, kind of the more pop-oriented thing. But I just didn't know that you could go to school for songwriting. So I was like, well, maybe I'll go for musical theater, or I'll go for, classical voice or something like that. And so Pitt also has an ethnomusicology program, which I thought was very fascinating because of loving so many instruments and like world cultures and music and like knowing so much about that. I was like, oh, that might make sense for me too. Just studying, kind of going deeper into that. So I partially went to Pitt because of that, but then I'm not going to lie, I also partially went there because Rusted Root was from Pittsburgh, and they had gone to Pitt, and I was like,
I love that. That's
cool. So I was like, ooh, maybe I'll do that. I'll be like Rusted Root, and then I actually met most of them within the first like semester that I was there.
Really?
And so because I mean it's it's a small city, and I got to kind of connect with folks, and I actually interviewed the Michael Kulabicki, the lead singer and guitar player. I interviewed him for this acoustic website that I met all these people through the Pittsburgh was really fun. Like I love Pittsburgh, and being a freshman there was so cool because the music community is fairly small, but they were really welcoming to me, and I met a lot of really cool people, and and the Rusted Root band members and characters are all kind of intertwined with that. So this website was like, do you want to go interview Michael Glebicki? And I was like, what?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I did, and I interviewed them, and it was like, it blew my mind. I still have.
Was he nice? I mean, it's
always, yeah.
You don't want to meet your heroes, right?
Oh yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, no, they were very. I mean, they're just like super sweet, like hippie-ish folk. Cool. You know what I mean? And yeah, it was neat. And then like full circle a couple years ago, because then I kind of became buds with Liz Berlin, who's one of the members, and we became kind of buddy a little bit, like online, and just seeing at shows and stuff. And so and then eventually her and her husband own Mr. Small's Funhouse in Pittsburgh, which is a pretty big music venue there. And so I played there, like one of their smaller rooms a couple years ago, and Liz came to my show.
Wow.
So weird in full circle. And yeah, it was a little, one of those little life moments where you just have to like it was an ecstatic little life moment for me.
Sure, definitely milestone there.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah. It was really sweet, and I don't know if she knows how much that meant to me, but yeah, it was really cool.
That is awesome.
The photo's on my Instagram if anyone wants to see. Scroll back, you'll find it.
Well, so what took you to Berkeley?
Yeah,
because I mean, obviously it's Berkeley.
yeah. Well, and then through Pitt, some of the friends that I made there, I made a few friends there that just kind of were big important people in my life, and they both of them were like, oh, do you know about this? Like, do you know about Berkeley? You would be perfect for Berkeley. Like, you need to go to Berkeley, because I wasn't liking Pitt as far as the university, and just kind of what I was getting out of the school. I was just kind of like right. And other than they gave me a free like bus pass, so I could just take the bus everywhere. So I was just going to open mic nights all the time and hanging out with Rusted Root. So yeah, but then yeah, so I found out about Berkeley and the songwriting program and everything, and then left Pitt, took a semester off, and was like anxiously trying to waiting to see if I was going to get into Berkeley. And I was like, I'm not going to get in, Right. And then I got in and went up there, and yeah, I mean, it was, I say that it was kind of like space camp for musicians, I mean, it was really, it was awesome. Like, I mean, some folks have mixed feelings about it, and I think music education in general, people are like, well, like, how can you really study songwriting, man? You just got to feel it, whatever.
Right. Well,
and I'm kind of like, okay. But I mean, I feel I've always felt like it's kind of that balance between, feeling it and finding your own emotion and your own, vibe and energy and cosmic energy, spiritual energy, whatever in it.
Sure.
But then also, like, obviously, you have to have, there's also the technical aspect of it, and learning, from the greats, and songwriting is no different than playing, learning, piano parts, or, learning Puccini or whatever on piano. I mean,
right.
Songwriting is kind of the same thing, where it's like, why is it's kind of the program was set up where, they take all of, they kind of take the idea and the concepts of all these great songwriters over history, and kind of what is the universal things, what's the universal themes that kind of run through this, and what makes a song great, like what makes it, and it's, again, similar to studying poetry, studying, any other type of art, but it's kind of hard for people to look at pop as high art, but when it really comes down to it, it's like, there's a reason why Stevie Wonder and Sting and Paul Simon, Paul McCartney, like, there's a reason why these songs have stood the test of time. And, yeah, so it was that alone, the songwriting program was really effective for me, and I loved it. And it was just as a person who loves world cultures and different types of people, 40% of the students were international students, so that was crazy.
Wow.
And, yeah. So and then you're in Boston, and Boston has some of the best schools in the world. So it's kind of like this perfect place for me. It was like this perfect place to go to college, where it's like people are there. Like, don't get me wrong. It's like, there was some partying and stuff that was going on with folks. But
Sure.
overall, it's like people were
There
really
to
wanting to
learn.
learn, and like figure out, and take it seriously, and yeah. And just, I mean, just on a sillier note, I mean, it's just the people that you meet, and like the connections that Berkeley has was so freaking nuts.
Right.
You're just having clinics and workshops, and you just like see a little poster that's like, oh, Jimmy Buffett is doing a workshop in 20 minutes, and you're like,
really?
What? And like you realize that they didn't promote it, and no one knew about it. So you show up, and there's literally you and 50 people talking to Jimmy Buffett. And
that's crazy. I didn't realize they did stuff like that.
Oh yeah, it was nuts. And I mean, obviously sometimes there would be like, somebody comes through and they do a big giant workshop and they make this huge deal about it. But then sometimes it would just be this weird last minute thing where they just show up and you're like, what Prince's drummer is here right now? Let's go hang out with Prince's drummer and hear all these crazy Prince stories. And so it was it's so insane. It was wacky.
Wow, that's incredible. I didn't realize that happened there. I always like to ask people that go to Berkeley, like, what was that audition process like? Like, some people have like totally different stories, like where it's like, oh, they just let me in because of whatever.
Well, that was kind of the crazy thing, because I was at the time. I think now it's different because that was a long while ago. But at the time there was no auditions. Like, you basically you kind of gave them a portfolio, and you gave him a portfolio, and kind of. But see, that's the thing, is like, the sad truth of the matter is, just like a lot of schools, I mean, if you have the money, they'll take you. They'll just kind of take you. So the weird thing is, Berkeley kind of had this. There were folks that you literally were in class with, like, why are you here? And it wasn't even a rude thing, but you're like, you literally are in the vocal department at this school that is considered one of the best schools in the world for music. And you literally started singing last year, and like, you're really not that great, or you're like not developed enough. Like, you're not ready.
Right.
And it kind of like, and it wasn't, not only was it not good for that person, but it wasn't good for the rest of the students, because you're just like, it kind of, it was like,
yeah, it's like 10 minutes of time that could have been used elsewhere. You're like,
yeah. And again, it doesn't, like, it's not to be, again, you're not trying to be rude to folk. It's just, obviously, when you're at a certain, you just expect, okay, everybody's going to be at this particular level, right? By that point. But then again, on the flip side of it, it's, you also have, like, I went to school with Esperanza Spalding, who's like won all these Grammys for jazz, and she's like freaking insane. And so you have these like this spectrum, you know what I mean?
Right.
And
big Charlie Puth or something like that, like these people that like come out of there and you're like, oh wow.
Right. Yeah. And it's just nuts, and but the audition process, there really wasn't one. You kind of just had to show that you were like serious and doing stuff, and I mean, it was so funny because I was so worried that, like, because I'm thinking, I'm going to go to Berkeley, everybody's going to have a ton of albums that they did, and everybody's going to be super successful and blah blah. And at that point, I had put out 2 albums. Like, I had like put out albums, I had like done all this stuff, but I'm like, I'm not good enough. And then I get there and I'm like, wait, you guys don't have multiple albums? What? Like, you don't?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So it was like, in certain ways, I feel like I was actually a lot further along than a lot of the folk, But again, on the flip side of it, then there's people who just destroy you, you know what I mean? And which is great, because you're like, again, some people, they don't like that. Me personally, it's like, I like that drive. I like being around people that are better and that can challenge me.
Right. Because there's like the end game is trying to get, a record deal, or, be successful in some aspect of it. It's not like you go there to be like, all right, now I'm the best singer and I'm going to be an accountant. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah. Well, and the funny thing too, is like, there's a lot of people, obviously artists can be very insecure, and you have a lot of folk that, they honestly, they just kind of were there for the teachers to be like, you're so great. And so,
just for some validation.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're like, I know, I'm so great. Right. And they couldn't handle criticism, and when they got criticism where it's like, hey, maybe this song you could change this up or do this or that, they were like, oh yeah, and then you hear them play the song 6 months later and it's exactly the same. They didn't change anything. I mean, there were a lot of folk that didn't, they just wanted everybody to tell them how great they were. And
a lot of people don't have the thick enough skin to take the criticism, or like, this sucks for these reasons. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, it's plain. I came from radio, 15 years of it. And it's like, you had to present an air check to your boss, like of a show you did of just the parts where you talked, and he's going to sit there and critique every word you said. Like, why did you bring up this specific thing? And you're like, well, at the time, no. And then you're just like, you leave and you're just like some battered person. And then but it's like, you learn, because then it's like, well, the next time I'm going to present it, I didn't do all these things that you told me not to do. And then it's like, listening back, you're like, wow, that sounded 1,000 times better.
Oh,
like, they're obviously at this level. The professors are at this level for a reason. They're not there just because they want to be mean.
Right. Yeah, I mean? For sure. Yeah. And it's, it's this weird thing where it does have to kind of just like work for you personally. It's like, for me personally, it worked for me, but it's like, for some folk, it doesn't really work for them. And obviously there's tons of people that are so successful and so amazing that have never gone to school for songwriting, that have never gone to school for performing and are unreal. And then there's the flip side of it, which is the people who, they read all the books, they go to all the classes, they do all the stuff, but everything is so formulaic because they can't figure out a way to insert their own voice and their own self into what they're doing. So everything is just like, well, this should work. This should, like, I followed all the rules.
Right.
And it's, so it's got to be this kind of balance of everything. And again, kind of like what works for you personally.
Sure. So you graduated from Berkeley, and then what's next? You said you moved around quite a bit. Were you trying to like what was the next, I guess, kind of step for you? Like, where were you going with it?
Yeah. So the idea was kind of like, I mean, again, kind of growing up, to me, especially Dave Matthews Band, they were kind of the archetype for what I wanted a career to look like, right? Where it was, here's a band who sold 100, this is pre-internet, they sell 100,000 records of an independent album before they get signed. And so, they, whether you like the music or not is kind of a moot point, because it's like what they did. They built this fan base, they built this following, and it was all about shows. It was all about the music. And they I would say they have these great songs as well, which helps, but they had this crazy live show and they build this kind of community, and then they sell all these albums. And then once they get signed, RCA's like, we'll kind of let you do whatever you want because you are, so we just want to scale what you're doing. And they did scale what they were doing, and then they were selling out arenas 5 years later, know. And so and also they were really into the great, having great merch, having a great live show where they're always playing different songs, and the people know everything. Like, the fans know all the music. And so to me, that was kind of always what I wanted. Like, I wanted to not only kind of have that type of a fan base, even if it was a minor version of that, have that type of a fan base, but also business wise, I thought it was a smart business decision to build your own following, because then you have something to pitch, you got more bargaining chips and all that kind of stuff. So when my friends were all moving to LA and Nashville and New York, I ended up moving to Philly, mostly just because it was centralized and it was cheap. And so I could just kind of tour out of there. And so it was mostly just to start figuring out how to do the DIY touring thing. And eventually, it kind of like, as I was just touring, because I was doing, roughly like 100 shows a year for like a 4-year period. Yeah. And so,
so that was it. That was your life. I mean, you're doing. And at this point, were you doing the show as a one-man band with the loops and the different instruments?
It wasn't nearly as crazy as it is now, but I mean, I always had, I've had bands and played with bands and backing bands and stuff. But when I and all through Berkeley, I played with bands. And then after, like, at the end of Berkeley, when I was leaving, basically my band, obviously they were kind of going in different directions. I also couldn't afford to pay, to pay a band to
I mean, it's not
tour full time. Yeah.
Sure.
So so I started doing looping stuff just kind of as a way to get a little bit bigger sound. And then it kind of just kept evolving, because at that point it was fairly new. Like not a whole lot of people had been doing it. And so, this was it was a way to get a little bit bigger sound. But then I also realized that I could kind of be my own auxiliary player, where all these little instruments I had over the years, where if I had a band, I might like show them this little penny whistle part and then give in the penny whistle, right? I'm like, oh, I can just like play that penny whistle part and then just loop it and then, play other stuff. Yeah. So it kind of started out as just a way to get a little bit of a bigger sound. And then it kind of just kept evolving and evolving and evolving. And then eventually I went to like software based looping stuff and use Ableton Live for it. And so now I have all these, it's still all on the fly, but now I have all these controllers and stuff that I can do, DJ effects, and I can kind of build, I can kind of build the rig however I want it virtually, but then also physically I build stuff and it's like,
sure.
It just kept going and going and going. And, because I gravitate towards kind of pop arrangements and, instrumental hooks and, kind of loop based music, really, it kind of goes hand in hand. It makes it, it's still a challenge, but it's easier than, arranging those types of a thing versus, some massively composed, thing.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like it's massively composed in its own way. You know what I mean? But it's like, it's its own weird beast. And so it just kind of evolved. And then I eventually, like, I knew that I was going to end up in a bigger music city, like a New York or Nashville, and then moved to New York, was kind of just burning through money, and was like, I don't know if it's really even worth it to be trying to do this here, because I'm not really doing what it is that I want to do. Then I got my van broken into and had like all my gear stolen. So all the stuff that I had for so long, I was like,
worked for,
yeah. And so that was kind of that happened 10 years ago. So, I mean, it's been a while, but it was kind of
stings.
Like, oh, yeah. Wow. And it was this big shift, it was this big shift of kind of, in a good, just almost a similar thing to, I feel like, what COVID has done for a lot of people, where you kind of had to start looking at it and being like, okay, what am I doing? Could I be doing things differently? Am I happy doing things this way? What is the next step? What's the next step? And so I realized that I was like, well, I think that I got to build a team. I have to figure out the more of the industry that I've kind of been avoiding for a while, because I've just been focusing on shows and trying to make some fans.
Sure.
But now I got to I want to build the team. I want to build this to like that next level. And so, long and short of it is, I ended up deciding to move to Nashville because I always knew I'd end up here. And then in the process of moving here, then it's like I ended up buying a home a few years after that, and this became like a giant project for me, where it was, I bought it as figure up, or like I build a lot of things and make a lot of things, and so
that's cool.
It was kind of like a massive DIY project, but it's been totally worth it. And so now, like, the EP, the Shimmer, and everything is kind of this new era of everything, because unfortunately music kind of had to get put on the back burner for a minute to do this remodeling, to kind of get settled finally in a place where, I mean, I'm still gonna tour as much as I possibly can, like that's the next wave and next step, but finding a place that I can hang my hat and not be like, I'm just going to jump from apartment to apartment and city to city.
Right.
Like, I just like, no, I do need to have that kind of centralized place that I can come back to and make music and do all that, while then also running around the countryside.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, so speaking of that, I mean, touring so much, doing 100 shows a year, like, how were you already in the mindset of, fixing up the home and kind of creating like a home base when COVID hit, or how did that kind of
that was
you?
Yeah. So because I had been touring since I moved to Nashville. I had been touring, but most of the the 100 shows a year period of time was before I kind of got down here. Then when I got down here, I was touring a bunch, but I hadn't put out a full, any type of collection of music, and was kind of kind of trying to figure out, not just figure out what I wanted to do with that next, but I was trying to find someone to do it with, like somebody to make the music with, because I do this one-man show kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the studio side of things and production, I always knew that I needed to find a producer that fit well with me, and so that was kind of a period that took a second to figure that out.
Do that,
and find that person. But yeah, I had the house. I got the house like 6 years ago or so. So the over the last 6-7 years, I've been kind of gradually remodeling it, going and doing shows here and there. I did a residency in Nashville for a little while. Yeah, and then but it's finally kind of, knock on wood, it's finally to a point where I don't have to do things to it all the time, because some of those projects, you start them and you're like, I can't stop until I finish this. It has to be finished,
right?
Or else, this is going to leak, or this is going to fall apart, or whatever. But it's, even though it's like as you're gradually getting older, you're like, oh my gosh, is this my life now? Am I just a contractor? Like, what am I doing?
Right.
You ultimately realize that I'm putting myself in a better position, and I'm actually, even though I'm older, it's like I'm in a better position now than I've ever been in my entire life to make my dreams come true, and kind of take everything and, like, the scaling of it. And, it's like, I don't need to be selling out arenas or anything like that, but I definitely would like to take the music as far as it can go and reach as many people as possible. And, it's hard to do that when you are, living in one room and, jumping from apartment to apartment and like really scrapping and really scraping by. And then, to finally kind of land in a place where, it can kind of be your base, and really build everything out of it. Again, there's times, again, it's like, as you see your friends give up gradually over the years, and you watch people go in different directions, and
right.
You kind of, it beats you down, and you're like, ugh. And then you watch, a bunch of 20-year-old kids are into this thing or that thing, and you're like, what? And then you feel like an old man, because you're like, why is this back? Like, why is everybody into this thing now? But in that all, it's like when I really like stop and like step back, I'm like, no, I'm in a better spot than I've ever been in my life, to make all of it happen. And I feel, inspired, more inspired than I have in a long, long time too. So that's good.
That's amazing. And with this new EP, was this something that you recorded in that room that you're sitting in? And also, like, was it done during the quarantine? Like, when was this record put together?
So I hooked up with a buddy of mine, this guy Kevin Rooney, and Kevin's like, he's a producer. He's also an auxiliary player. He plays tons of different stuff. An amazing programmer. And he's actually he was in Rascal Flatts. So he was in.
Oh, wow.
He was a touring member of Rascal Flatts. Yeah, and they're one of my favorite groups. Like, I love Rascal Flatts.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So that was huge. And so, but his production's amazing. He's also an Ableton Live guy. So when he does the stuff for Rascal Flatts, he does all sorts of triggering and, plays stuff and plays drum pads and all sorts of things. So he's in that Ableton world all the time. So that was a really good thing for me to have, because then being able to transition the recording stuff to actually playing it live is way easier,
right?
But
you're able to talk to each other,
and
like
having
speak the same language, so to speak.
And having all the sounds, the same sounds. It's like we can make the keyboard sounds and have the exact same keyboard sounds that we have on the record and stuff, and so it sounds so much more accurate to the record, which is awesome. And so so we started working. The plan was actually to release the EP. We were almost finished with it, and the plan was to release it in April, right, of last year. So around this time of last year,
right?
And then the world shuts down,
and it's like the pandemic
or
whatever. Yeah.
And so I'm just like, because I was also thinking, even at that time, I was like, this may last a year. Like this, like we don't know exactly how long this is going to last. And the last thing that I had wanted was to dump a bunch of time and money into finally releasing something, and then get PR people involved and get all the businessy people involved. And then I'm like, well, then what happens if things did take off? What happens if things do start to take off? And then all of a sudden everything kind of dies down, because you still can't tour for 6 months or 8 months or a year. So I was kind of like, I don't
will anyone
know.
still care at that point?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And it's like, I also just didn't want to, I mean, just financially speaking, it's like, I didn't want to release it and then have nothing else left, you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden you're, again, a year later, you're like, okay, I should probably release something. And now, like, I don't have the budget to do it because I just blew all the budget over here. So the aches and pains of doing, the DIY thing. So we waited a little bit, and I've kind of focused on other stuff and just getting all the other things together for it, and the behind the scenes stuff, and got really into the video editing and made a couple music videos. And
those are all DIY also, because I saw one of the videos that you did. Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. So so I did like 2 official music videos for Linda McCartney and
that's
your
the one
girlfriend.
I just watched. Okay.
Yeah, and so Linda McCartney was that was a friend of mine, did all the illustrations. Tiffany Vandermark's her name, and she's an awesome illustrator. So she did all the little illustrations for it, and then I recorded it, and then I edited it, and she kind of made them into little GIFs. Like they kind of like moved a little bit.
Yeah.
But then I also took like the frames, the still frames of them. And so all of like the like quote unquote like animation, like I did all that. So it's like I like,
okay.
Yeah. So some of them kind of moved, but then I kind of made them move around the screen and interact with them, and kind of it was a process.
Yeah, I'm sure.
A long time. Yeah. So so I made that, and then I did the Your Girlfriend video and made this like weird shimmery disco tunnel that's in the other side of the basement that's still up. I just got into like figuring out the video editing stuff and doing the looping stuff, and then also like showing multiple camera angles of the looping, because I always needed to do all those things. And I kind of think it was a blessing in disguise, because had everything been opened up, I would have released the EP and then just been like, I want to play shows. I want to play shows. I want to play shows. So having to force myself to do all of that other stuff, it gave me a lot more content, so that's been good. So the EP ended up coming out. We released it in December. And then, and so ever since then, we've just been, promoting it and getting out there and doing as much other content as possible.
That's awesome. Oh, I'm sure you're writing too still.
Oh yeah. Yes. Yeah. And there's piles of new stuff, and we're probably going to start working on some new recordings. Not sure like how I'm going to release them or what the next plan is with that, but just to get some stuff rolling, is that's the plan.
Very cool. And it looks like stuff's opening up here as far as touring. I see a lot of tour dates for, October, November. So it's not too far away now. 6 months, and hopefully you'll be able to, push the record and play it, to human beings, and not your computer.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, the amount of like energy that you get from playing live show. I mean, like playing live is my favorite thing to do. Like, I mean, I just want to play live. I want to develop a crazy live show and do that. And I'm like, I'll record at some point. It's like I like recording, but it's like I love playing live, and that theatrical kind of bond and interaction that you can get with a crowd. And so even if it's just like a handful of people, it's that's always been such a huge part of what I do. So so just having that, I feel like relatively speaking, even though it's like there's been times that I've been like super down and out and just been like, oh my gosh, kind of this roller coaster of the last year emotionally. Relatively speaking, I feel like I've held myself together pretty decent to be able to like create, which is awesome. But I'm like, man, if I actually could get that energy of shows, I feel like I'd just be on fire, So I'm I'm looking forward to seeing what life looks like when that happens again.
That's awesome. Well, I'm here in Nashville now, man. So we'll definitely be, my family and I just moved here, like I said, about a month ago. So
that's awesome.
We'll be at your shows once all this, this mess kind of comes to an end. Well, dude, awesome, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I do have one more question for you. What do you have any advice for aspiring artists?
Oh man, yeah. So the handful of things that I say, or a couple things that I say, is that I've not just my own experience, but just watching other people over the years and watching people they get their dreams and then they think that it's going to look something different than it actually does. And then they're still not happy. My big thing that I've always said is, you got to figure out in all this, you got to figure out what it is that like you truly, truly love about doing this, even when it's the hardest to do. Right. So if you're out and you're touring, if you're bummed out that there's only 5 people in the crowd, it's going to be a tough road, because like if you can figure out how to still find joy with there being 5 people there and still feel like, yeah, I put on a good show. I mean, obviously having 5 people there is not sustainable. You know what I mean? Obviously, like, not making any money is not sustainable. But if you can figure out the thing that you truly love and connect to it, not just the idea of it, not just the idea that it's like, oh, I think I love, I think I could connect to people, I think I could do this. Like, well, try it, see if you still love it, and if you do still love it, again, the people who think, well, I'm going to feel so great and I'm going to finally feel like I arrived once I'm selling out a club. Well, a lot of the people, they finally get to that point and they're still not happy. And they're like, why am I not happy? I don't understand. I thought this was going to make me feel great. And so if you can find at the bottom, if you can find the things that truly, truly make you happy, I think it's a lot easier to, not easy, but it's more helpful to sustain you throughout the course of it. The other thing that I say is avoid drinking if you can. Because I don't I mean, I don't drink.
Neither do I, so go for it.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, some of it is like I've had a lot of people in my life, family and friends and things that have had lots of addiction issues and things like that. So it runs in my family, but also, this is it can be an incredibly depressing life, leading the life of an artist, going on tour. You're away from family, you're away from friends. Some of it is awesome touring, but some of it is really depressing. And then you're going to have a lot of crappy shows. And you're also going to have substances around you all the time. And a lot of those are free. And so it's like, you might not get paid, but you sure get those drink tickets, or you get your guarantee. And then you're like, well, maybe I'll just like get a couple beers. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, every night turns into a party. Every night turns into, kind of self-medication. And sooner than later you realize, oh crap, I'm caught up in this and I don't know how to turn this off now. And so I think that if you can find healthy ways, not to mention you'll save so much money, like you won't gain a bunch of weight, like, it's probably just better for you if you can figure out ways to, I mean, again, not completely knocking it, but it's just, if you can find healthier ways to cope, I think than chemicals, you're probably going to be better off. And if you can do that early on, aha,